This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So let's try this again. We're going to talk about dwelling and homeowners coverage. All right. Again, everyone's self-muted. If you have any questions, unmute, chime on in. I'm recording this, so I will post it probably tonight. I think I'll put it on the public YouTube channel for at least a week to 2 weeks. And then it'll be on my website. For those of you that are registered, you'll have access to it. So I'll put it on both areas initially. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions. All right. It's kind of end of the day. I'm kind of winding down, and yeah, we'll just cover some material. So cool. So dwelling coverage. A lot of people do have. I guess it does get tricky with this information because with a homeowner's policy, you have dwelling, coverage, or the dwelling section of the policy, and then here you have dwelling coverage. Okay. When you hear dwelling coverage or dwelling insurance, you're thinking of a landlord policy. All right. So let's kind of go into this here. So yeah, it's a landlord policy. All right. May or may not be owner occupied. All right. So let's say you have a single family home that you rent out to someone else. If you don't live there, you cannot buy a homeowner's policy. And so you would go with a dwelling policy. But let's say you have a 3-unit structure, all right, where you live in one unit, you rent out the other 2. So even though you live there, you cannot get a homeowner's policy because homeowner's policy is only 1 to 2 family living units, and you got 3. Okay, so that makes it outside of the realm of writing a homeowner's policy. So you hear go to a dwelling policy. It's covering 1 to 4 units. Okay, and it's for dwelling coverage. Just think it's property. You're a landlord. You own a building. You don't live there. You're renting it out to someone else, right? But you need coverage for the building because you own the building. Now, whoever rents that house from you, they should have a renter's policy to cover them and their belongings, right? And the liability associated with their guests coming on your premises, right? And that's kind of how you want to know this, right? So keep it that simple. So it's more property coverage only. You have basic, broad, and special, right? Basic's DP1, broad is DP2, special is DP3. Well, the basic form, very limited, only covers fire, lightning, and internal explosion. To be honest with you, personal property is actually optional on a basic form. I don't think you'll get that on the test. However, you might get the question about additional living expenses is actually optional on a basic form. Additional living expenses, personal property is automatic on the broad and special form. But yeah, they may say, which of the following provides coverage for additional living expenses and which one doesn't. It's probably worded a little wrong. Yeah. What does a DP2 provide coverage for that is not included in a DP1 or is optional on a DP1? And that would be the additional living expenses. That's kind of the common topic there. All right. And so it's a basic form. Fire, lightning, and internal explosion are the 3 perils. All right. For additional charge, you can add the extended coverages. That's a package of 7 additional perils. And for another additional charge, you can add the vandalism and malicious mischief. All right. So again, you buy a basic form, comes with these 3 perils, pay a little extra to get the extended coverage, pay a little more extra to get the vandalism coverage. Or you can just buy that DP2. You got to know the extended coverage perils. You'll probably get 1 to 2 questions on this. One will be probably which of the following is not an example of an extended coverage peril. So you need to know these. Extended coverages on a basic form is additional charge, and it's a package of 7 additional perils as far as adding coverage to your policy. They're pretty self-explanatory. Windstorm covers windstorm, Hail covers loss due to or because of hail. Aircraft covers, not that you own an aircraft, but an aircraft crashes into your house. That's what we're talking about, all right? Riot or civil commotion, maybe there's a peaceful demonstration that gets out of hand and then a riot ensues. That would be covered here. Vehicles, that would be damage from vehicles, but not yours. It's not going to cover your car because even though your car is parked in your garage and the house burns down with the car in it, your homeowner's policy covers the house, or the dwelling policy covers the house, or the structure, and then your personal auto policy covers the car. So you got to keep that separate. So the vehicles coverage here means some other car loses control and drives through your house. That's vehicle damage to your property from some outside party. Maybe they don't have insurance or they don't have enough. This is where your insurance company could cover the claim or cover the loss and rebuild your living room, and then the insurance company takes over the claim and goes after the responsible party. And that's that term called subrogation. The insurance company will pay you what you're legally entitled to, and then the insurance company takes over the claim and goes after the responsible party to recover the damages that they paid you. Explosion, maybe a passing truck explodes, causing some damage to the structure. And smoke. Okay. Now, this is not friendly fire smoke. This would be hostile fire smoke. Two-story homes typically suffer more losses than a one-story home. If there's a fire downstairs, it will create smoke damage upstairs. But if there's a fire upstairs, when the firefighters put the fire out and dump water on it, the water drips and does water damage downstairs. Okay. And so this would be smoke damage because of a hostile fire. So again, you need to know that it's a package of 7 additional perils that can be added to your basic form. If you buy extended coverages, then you can purchase vandalism and malicious mischief. And so, someone breaks and damages your house. That's vandalism. Now, there is a 60-day limit. If the property is left vacant or unoccupied for more than 60 days, we're not going to cover vandalism losses. See, if no one's watching your house for more than 2 months, it kind of becomes a target for vandals. And so the risk is increased. We're not going to cover it. Now, if you have someone, check on the property, upkeep it. Maybe if you're taking a 3-month vacation, you get a house sitter, then yeah, it's not vacant or unoccupied. So it would be covered. Right? But if you left it empty and took off for a couple months, then yeah, something happens. It may not be covered depending on the time constraints. You need to know the definition between vacant and unoccupied. So vacant means you've got like a cabin up in the hills and there's no contents, so you don't keep personal property there, and nobody lives there regularly. So it's just an empty cabin. Unoccupied means you have a cabin up the hill, but you leave it furnished. So there's contents, but nobody regularly lives there. All right, so make sure you understand the difference. Now, for the test, whether it's vacant or unoccupied, if it's more than 60 days, we're not going to cover any vandalism losses associated with that. All right. So basic is, again, fire, lightning, internal explosion. You could add extended coverage. You could add vandalism. But instead, just roll up to the broad form, the DP2, because it includes the basic perils, right? The fire, lightning, internal explosion. It includes extended coverage and vandalism now as part of the program. But it also gives you additional perils. And the ones I'm emphasizing here are burglary, falling objects, and collapse. And the reason I'm emphasizing these 3 is because it's very common to get a test question that says, which of the following perils is covered by the DP2 broad form, which is not included in a DP1 basic form? And those are the most common ones that they're using in that question. Okay, so make sure you get those 3 down. They're very common. I mean, there's some other perils and stuff, but you don't have to go too much into too much detail on those. At least we haven't seen any questions that go beyond this. Among other things, burglary, falling objects, and collapse are also covered in a DP3 and are not covered in a DP1. Okay, so you do get those comparison contrast questions, so be prepared for that. The special form, or the DP3, is all risk. Open peril, all risk, all perils, however you want to say it, however you might see it on the test. We cover anything that happens to the structure that you could possibly imagine, except for this list of exclusions. Common exclusions, think of catastrophic losses like earthquake, flood, nuclear risk, and war. They're not predictable, catastrophic in nature, and therefore typically not covered. Sometimes you could be in a state that offers earthquake coverage. Flood, you can buy back also through the National Flood Insurance Program. For commercial, there is some nuclear risk coverage. It could be afforded, typically through the national government or some outside companies. War typically is not covered, okay? Because again, it's unpredictable and catastrophic. Wear and tear is not covered. Things have a tendency to wear out, and we're not going to replace that. And intentional acts. That's where you damage your own property to try and collect from the insurance, and that's not covered. Right? So intentional acts, intent, it's proven. Yeah, it could be a fraudulent claim if you actually submit a claim. Okay, so these are the common exclusions, but the basic form is good, broad form is better, special is the best because it's very comprehensive in coverage, and you can only list so many exclusions. That means if you look at that special form, if it's not on the exclusion list and the loss occurs, it's covered. Right? I want to change the terminology. Sometimes the test will say which of the following has the broadest coverage. Basic, broad, special, or they'll probably list something else. When you hear which of the following has the broadest coverage, you kind of want to immediately go to broad form, and that would be wrong. Broadest in that question means the one that is more comprehensive, and that would be the DP3 or special form. That would be the program that has the broadest coverage. So be wary of things like that. The test is tricky. It's designed to trick you, to cause you to fail so they can collect some retest fees. Okay, but folks, it is passable. You just got to put in some time and energy. All right. So as far as since dwelling is property coverage, this would be the coverage. Number one, coverage A is the dwelling. That means the house itself. Anything bolted, welded, nailed, attached to that structure would be under coverage A. Coverage B would be other structures. Could be a fence, a gazebo, maybe the garage is separate from the main house, maybe just a utility line connecting the two buildings. But the dwelling is the main house. Coverage B is any other structure on the residence premises. Sometimes you might see it as separate structures. Once in a while, you'll see it listed as appurtenant structures. APPURTENANT, appurtenant structure. Your exam just goes a little crazy with the thesaurus, and that's all it is. All right, so be familiar with that. It's in my material, so you'll see that. The standard limit for coverage B is 10% of coverage A. So let's say it costs $400,000 to rebuild this house. Coverage B is automatically 10% of the $400,000, so we're going to give you $40,000 to rebuild your separate structures on the residence premises. All right. So the policy is paying $400,000 to rebuild the house plus $40,000 to rebuild any other structure. Personal property is covered anywhere in the world. All right. On premises is 50% of coverage A. So again, if you go to coverage A's $400,000, 50% of that, we're going to give you $200,000 for your personal property on premises. Now, under dwelling policy, it's a landlord policy. We're kind of covering the property just in this location. If you go off premises, your personal property limits are reduced. I haven't seen that on the test. If you do see that, let me know and I'll add it. I do have it on my sheet. If you look at some of the charts right under the playbook on my website, I do have that listed, but I don't emphasize that because most people don't get that. Okay. Some other coverages, if the house burns down, then the renters that are staying there, if they have to relocate because the location is what's called untenantable, they're not going to pay you rent if they got to stay in a hotel because the house is not tenantable. They can't live there. And so this particular portion of the policy pays lost rental income. Sometimes lost rents is what you'll see. Now, when I say lost rents, it pays the missing rents that the renters would have paid you minus discontinued expenses. Discontinued expenses would be utilities. right? Because if the place burned down and there's nobody there, there's nobody using gas, electricity, so we, the insurance company, are not going to pay you for something no one's using. Because again, that would be a gain for you. But that's rental income. Now, if you were living there, remember, let's go with that threeplex. You lived in one unit, you rented out the other two, and the place burns down where you cannot stay there. Well, the additional living expenses would cover the cost to put you up at a hotel. Okay, to rebuild the house so you can move back in. So coverage A and B are real property. You want to know that is property. That's structures on the premises. All right. Coverage C, of course, is personal property or contents coverage. Okay. And then, so those are direct loss coverages, direct physical loss, damage, or destruction to the dwelling, other structures, or personal property. Those are what we call direct loss coverages. And then rental income and additional living expenses are the indirect loss coverages. Sometimes you'll have as consequential loss coverages. Okay, so you got to know the difference on those. Which of the following is an example of a direct loss? Which of the following is an example of an indirect or consequential loss? So A, B, and C would be direct losses. Coverage D and E would be indirect or consequential. Okay. All right, some other optional coverage. So remember, dwelling is only property. So optional coverages that you might want to consider is getting liability. All right, now it's called the CPL, Comprehensive Personal Liability. All right, get this acronym down. Don't think it's commercial property liability. No. Or that doesn't make sense. Comprehensive personal liability. Because sometimes on the test you won't see liability added to a dwelling policy. They'll just see it under the CPL. And so it's comprehensive personal liability. It starts off with $100,000 of liability coverage. You can always buy more. And then you have $1,000 in medical expenses to others. You can always buy more. So liability covers other people on the premises, or basically injured because of your actions. For dwelling policy, this pretty much covers liability exposures associated with this location. Okay, but if you live there, it would actually extend to follow you and your family members anywhere in the world. So I look at it this way. If you have a cocktail party, one of your friends slips and falls, the medical will cover the ambulance ride. And because they hit their head when they fell down, right, they're in the hospital, that's the personal liability paying their medical bills and their lost wages because they cannot work. But this is liability, and remember that. L for liability, think L for lawsuit. This is some other third party that got injured on your property or got injured because of your actions. And so they're suing you to pay for the damages. So if you slipped and fell in your own house, the medical and the liability is not for you. You should have health insurance. This is for other people. All right, keep that in mind. Which is different in auto, because liability covers the other people, but medical covers you and your passengers in your vehicle. But in a home, the liability and the medical is only for other people, third parties. Theft is also optional. You can add it on by endorsement. All right. There's two types of theft coverage. We have broad theft and limited theft. So if the property is owner occupied, you can get broad theft coverage because you live there, you keep stuff there. If you don't live there, right, you have a fourplex and you rent out all 4 units, since it's not owner occupied, you can only get limited theft coverage. All right. But again, you're a landlord. You need coverage for the building. That's the property. You can include liability in case someone gets injured on the premises. But the reason the liability is optional is, let's say you live someplace else and you have a homeowner's policy. Well, Section 2 of your homeowner's policy is liability. And that liability covers you and your family members anywhere in the world. So rather than buy the liability and add it to your dwelling policy, since you already have liability as part of your homeowner's policy, you can extend the liability from your homeowner's policy to this location. Okay? And then you don't have to pay the additional premium for this. It'll cost less to extend the liability from your home policy to this location versus buying the liability endorsement added to a dwelling policy. Okay. So those are the optional coverages there. So remember, for dwelling, it's a landlord. You know, a single-family home that you rent out to someone else, a duplex, whether you live in one and rent out the other. You know, it's you can cover it under a landlord policy. Okay, threeplex or even a fourplex. All right, 1 to 4 units is a landlord policy. For the test, you buy a dwelling policy instead of a homeowner's policy because you don't live there. That's the emphasis. So you have a property, you rent it out to someone else, you don't live there, you need a landlord policy, and dwelling coverage is a landlord policy. Okay, that's how you want to understand that. All right. When you're logged into my site, right under the playbook, I have a couple hyperlinks that lead you to some charts, and this is one of the charts. Okay, so the basic form is a DP1. Remember, it's only fire, lightning, internal explosion. DP2 is a broad form. It covers those basic form perils plus more. All right. And the DP3 is a special form, which is all risk or open perils. So it's a lot more coverage. So a DP1 is good. DP2 is better. The DP3 would be the best if you are a landlord. All right. Yeah, here's the actual cash values ACV. So I've got some abbreviations here. RC's replacement cost. And remember, coverage B is sometimes referred to as a pertinent structure. So instead of other structure or separate structure, you might see a pertinent structure. Right. And like I said, the liability and theft are optional. These are your optional charges under the dwelling program. All right. All right, let me go back. Do we have any questions on the dwelling coverage at this point in time? No, we're all good. All right. If you haven't registered, consider it. Right. But what I'm going to do here, no, we're not done yet. Okay. Let me switch over and let's jump into the homeowner's policy. Okay. So homeowner's coverage, a little different than dwelling. Right. In order to buy a homeowner's policy, the property must be what we call owner occupied. You own it, you live in it. We can cover 1 to 2 single-family living units, so a single-family home, or even a duplex. So if you live in one unit, you rent out the other unit, the other portion, you can actually get a home policy because you live there, or you can actually go to dwelling policy because it's up to 2 units. So you have choices, right? And it's a package. Right? What I mean by package, it's a multi-line policy. Covers property just like dwelling, but dwelling, the theft and the liability was optional, but homeowners is all packaged up. So it's property, theft, and liability all built in. So it's like going to the restaurant and eating off the combo plate menu. You know, pick a burger, which one would you like? And this one comes with fries and a drink. It's a package. The dwelling policy is you're eating off the a la carte menu. Pick a burger. Would you like to add fries? Would you like to add a drink? Because those are additional charge. Right? And that's how you want to view this. So dwelling is the a la carte menu, right? And the homeowners is the package or combo plate menu. All right. So it is multi-line coverage. Section 1 is property, just like dwelling. Right? Kind of the same coverages. Coverage A, B, and C on a home policy is just like coverage A, B, C on a dwelling policy. Right? Coverage A covers the dwelling, the house itself, anything bolted, welded, nailed, attached to that house. Coverage B would be any other structures on the premises, separate structure, a pertinent structure, okay, but not attached to the dwelling. Like I said, maybe a utility line connecting the two. Personal property covers your belongings. Right? It's easy to tell the difference between structure and contents or personal property. Flip your house upside down. Anything that falls would be covered C, personal property. Anything that sticks is either going to be the house, the dwelling, or other structures. Okay, so personal property would be like your furniture, your clothes, your pots and pans. You flip the house upside down, that's going to fall. A ceiling fan would be attached to the structure. It's bolted to the structure. It's not easily removable, and that's how you want to understand that, where it's part of the structure. Coverage A, B, and C are direct loss coverages. Again, direct physical loss, damage, or destruction to your property. Coverage D is indirect, and we're going to call it loss of use. Now, to be honest with you, on that dwelling policy, if you added coverage D, right, lost rents, and you added coverage E, additional living expenses, you took those two parts and you added them together, and then we call it loss of use under a home policy, because it's really D and E from a dwelling policy just renamed as loss of use under a home policy. So to be honest with you, if I closer look at coverage D, it's broken down to D1, which is additional living expenses, and D2, which is lost rents. Right? So why dwelling has the property section in 5 parts and homeowners only has the 4 parts, I don't know. Okay, but realistically, it is the same, just a different name. Theft is included under the property section. Okay. Section 2 is liability, which covers you and your family members anywhere in the world. Again, you got the standard $100,000 of liability and $1,000 for medical, and you can always buy more. Now, one thing I forgot, under a home policy, personal property is covered anywhere in the world for the full coverage limit. So dwelling coverage, personal property, you had 50% of coverage A on premises, but if you went traveling, you actually had less coverage, 10% of coverage C off premises. But the homeowner's policy, personal property is covered up to the full limit anywhere in the world. Okay, so it's a little better coverage off premises. And so here's the limits here for section 1 under property. Dwelling, what does it cost to rebuild the house? That would be reconstruction costs. Right? Coverage B is other structures. The standard limit is 10% of coverage A. Coverage C is your personal property, like I said, anywhere in the world. The standard limit is 50% of coverage A. And then loss of use, which, like I said, is basically the rental income, additional living expenses from dwelling coverages. You just combine it, we call it loss of use. And the standard limit is 20% of coverage A. So these are kind of pre-fills. If you tell me how much it would cost to rebuild this dwelling, I could tell you automatically what these amounts are. Okay, because they're kind of preset percentages based on what the reconstruction cost calculation is for the dwelling. Right? So if it's $400,000 to rebuild the house, this is 10%, it's $40,000. This is 50%, which is $200,000, and this is 20%, which is $80,000. Right? And so this policy pays $400,000 plus $40,000 plus $200,000 plus $80,000 at a total loss. It can pay up to that amount. And that's how you want to understand that. You got to get these percentages down for these coverage parts. And it's called personal property coverage, coverage C. Sometimes you'll just see contents coverage. All right. So keep an eye out for that. All right. We've got a chat question here. Yes, there is. On these percentages, yes, there are. Okay. So make sure you get them down. Okay. And if you're on my website, again, I do have one of the charts is coverage parts, and I do have the breakdowns on all the policies. Okay. All right. Give an example. Give me a little more insight on what type of example on that. Oh, example 1 question. It'd probably be the other structures question. Let's say someone has a separate garage, and the limit of coverage on the separate garage would be which of the following? And you need to know it's 10% of the dwelling limit. Okay, so that's kind of how that would be. All right, it's a rare one, but once in a while, yeah, this 20%. I kind of put this here because I had a couple of people give me some feedback on it. Loss of use under a home policy is what amount? Is it 10% of coverage A, 20% of coverage A, 30% of coverage A, or 40% of coverage A? And so make sure you understand loss of use is 20% of coverage A. Okay. So be comfortable with that. Right. And that's not a math question. Okay. Just memorizing these parts and the amounts that are provided here. So, okay. Cool. Now, for property, even though we have, personal property is covered at 50% of coverage A, anywhere in the world. Certain high theft items, there are what we call sublimits. And a sublimit is a specific limit on a certain type of loss within the overall policy maximum. So even though with our example, if I go back, the other way, okay, personal property is 50% of coverage A. So if it costs $400,000 to rebuild this house, let's just say, then I have 50% for personal property. It's $200,000 to cover my personal property. But if someone steals your jewelry, you only get $1,500. So even though we have $200,000 of personal property coverage, theft of jewelry has a sublimit of only $1,500. So I don't care that you had $80,000 of jewelry, someone breaks in and steals it, this policy will only pay $1,500. And that's where you recommend getting a jewelry floater, right? Those personal property floaters or personal article floaters, depending on the value of the jewelry. Firearms, like guns, right? $2,500 is a sublimit. Silverware, $2,500. Discretion. Silverware is worth more than the jewelry. So silverware is $2,500 is a sublimit. Trailers not used with watercraft or trailers used with watercraft, $1,500. And cash, $200. Okay. Now, all of these, you can actually get a floater to increase the limits on this, okay, except for the money. Cash, you cannot buy a floater to increase the coverage on money. Okay. That's a stuck $200 for the test. All right. Another question, personal effects floater. So personal property floater just gives you more coverage than your homeowner's policy will afford. But it's unscheduled. That means we don't need a list, but you do have to prove you had it. Personal article floater is if you have a high ticket item, like a brooch that was handed down from generation to generation, and you want higher limits of coverage on that one piece of jewelry. And so this is when we say you need it scheduled. So that means I need an itemized list with an appraisal value. Actually, we need a copy of the appraisal. Okay. Personal effects floater is if you're traveling through Europe, you're backpacking through Europe, and the stuff that you are carrying on you, like your camera, your passport, your traveler's checks, that's personal effects, covers whatever you're carrying with you, typically when you're on a vacation. Okay, that's where that comes into play. All right. Yeah, not commonly used, because if your personal property is covered anywhere in the world, there may not be a need for a personal effects floater. But if you did buy a personal effects floater and you're traveling to Europe and someone stole your stuff, your camera, your passport, then, having a personal effects floater, there'd be a claim on that particular floater, but not on your home policy. Okay. All right. So Section 1 is property. Section 2 is liability. And it's broken down into coverage E, which is personal liability, which again, the standard limit is $100,000 per occurrence anywhere in the world. Right? And then medical to others is $1,000. Remember, that's the ambulance ride. Right? Now, this personal liability, this $100,000 is a minimum. You can always buy more. All right? But that's a per occurrence limit. So during your policy period, let's say you had 3 losses, at $100,000 per each limit, each type of loss. This pays $100,000 maximum per occurrence. However, your policy not only does it have a per occurrence limit, it has what's called an aggregate limit. And an aggregate limit is the maximum your policy will pay for all claims during this policy period. All right? And to be honest with you, most of your policies, the general aggregate limit is double your per occurrence limit. So if this is a $100,000 per occurrence limit for personal liability under this home policy, your aggregate limit will be $200,000. So you're allowed basically 2 full-size claims, liability claims during this policy period. So if a third claim came in that exceeded that $200,000, the insurance company is not going to cover it because you exceeded your policy limit for that policy period. Right? So you've got to know the difference between, this one situation where this loss happened versus if we combine all these situations, this is the maximum we pay for all claims during that policy period. So be wary of that. This is a very common test question. Aggregate limit is a maximum amount of risk a company will pay for all claims during a policy period, or maximum amount that a company will pay for all claims during a policy period. Right. So those of you that are in states that have split limit liability, okay, let's go with Alaska with a 2550. So that's a per occurrence limit, 25,000 for bodily injury per person, 50,000 bodily injury for all people per occurrence. The aggregate limit is probably going to be 100,000, okay, or 5,100. Okay, so kind of two full-size claims. That's what your aggregate limit will be. That's very common. Okay. So the types of homeowners policies. Well, first of all, HO1 for most states we don't even sell it anymore. So HO1's a basic form. So you could equate that to a DP1. DP1's basic, HO1's basic. DP2 is broad. Well, guess what? HO2 is broad. So it just covers more perils than a basic form. All right. So most people don't get HO1 on the test because most states don't offer it anymore. All right. So for a home policy, since HO1 really isn't available, if you own a home, HO2 would be good. HO3 would be better. It's a special form. But HO5 would be the best if you own a home. Right? So it does give you more coverage on your personal property. Right? So again, if you own a home, your options are HO2, HO3, and HO5. Right? Now, if you're renting, and I know I say renter's policy a lot because I do dabble in the real world, but for your test, there's no such thing as a renter's policy. It is a homeowner's policy that's designed for someone who rents an apartment or rents a home to stay. And that's called an HO4. So it's a homeowner's, HO, homeowners, and it's the broad form, renters. Now with this HO4, there's no coverage for the structure. So you can't cover a building you don't own. So for the HO4, it's basically a personal property policy for the tenant, right, that's renting your place. Okay, so and we'll get into that. And then HO6 is for someone who owns a condo. Again, there's no condo policy in the test world. In the real world, we call it a condo policy, but in the test world, there's no such thing. It's a homeowner's policy designed for someone who owns a condo called an HO6. The difference between HO6 and HO4 is with an HO6, you own the interior unit. So you need coverage for the structure, the interior structure, the kitchen cabinets, the bathtub. So you need some structures coverage. Whereas a tenant's policy or renter's policy, you don't need structures coverage because you don't own the structure. Okay, so that's the primary difference between those two. And now HO8 is for antique homes. It's actually a modified HO1. It's a basic form, actual cash value policy for antique homes. Those older homes that, we can, if an antique home burns down, we can rebuild it to look just like it did before that fire, but it's not an antique anymore. Okay, and so this is an actual cash value policy for those older homes that you cannot replace. Okay. So let's go into it. HO1 is basic. All right, you got your Section 1 property, dwelling, other structures, personal property. They're covered on an actual cash value basis. That means we depreciate it. And it's all basic form perils, so it's very limited. The Section 2, right? Liability is 100,000, medical is 1,000. The Section 2 on all of these home policies is the same. It doesn't matter whether you're a renter or an owner. The liability coverages are the same. 100,000 for liability, medical for 1,000 for medical. You can always buy more. So a lot of people say, "Well, I'm a renter. I don't need as much liability coverage." You think a renter has less to sue for than someone who owns a home? Because that renter, they're saving up money to buy a home, and they have a great job with good earning potential. And if they hit someone or injure someone, they can get sued. Right, and they can take their savings so they can't buy the home, and then they can garnish their wages where even with a good income, they can't buy a home again. So they don't have less to sue for. Don't get me wrong, right? So don't think because you're a renter, you need less coverage, okay? But you need to understand that the Section 2 liability, it doesn't matter which homeowner's policy we're going to discuss right here, this is always going to be the same, these same limits. All right. So then HO2 is a broad form. So we're going to change the coverage to replacement costs or reconstruction costs on the house, right, and other structures, but you still have depreciated or used value for your personal property, actual cash value. We're going to increase the perils from basic to broad, so we give you more, better coverage or more perils that cover losses, right, that provide losses. Okay. My day's winding down. Okay, so all right, so broad form coverage, broad form perils. Now HO3 is a special form. So again, we got the replacement costs or reconstruction costs on the structures, actual cash value on your personal property. But instead of broad form perils on everything, the HO3 is better than HO2 because now we're giving you all risk coverage on your structures. You still have your broad form coverage on your personal property, but you got the great coverage on the buildings now. Okay. Liability is the same, right? HO4 is that broad form renters, right? No coverage for the house because you don't own it. There's no other structures because if it's a separate garage, if it burns down, you can't collect. It's not your garage. There's no insurable interest. But we will cover your belongings on an actual cash value basis, broad form perils coverage for your contents anywhere in the world. All right. There's three parts to an HO4 that you want to be familiar with when you're pitching it. Number one, personal property. That's huge. Okay, but if you're talking to a college kid, well, I don't even own anything. I'm just renting this place. We got milk crates and a piece of wood to hold up our TV. Okay, so you don't have a lot of personal property, right? But if this place you're living in burns down, where are you going to stay? Well, that's the loss of use coverage. This will put you up in a hotel or help you put a deposit and stay someplace else in the local area versus having to, give up college, go back home to your family because you had a loss and you can't afford to stay there anymore. Okay. And so personal property, loss of use, and then of course liability. Okay. Taking a vacation, you shank a ball on a golf course, you hit someone in the head and they sue you. This is the liability portion that can help defend your case, number one, but help cover the loss so they don't garnish your wages for the rest of your life when you graduate college. Okay, so again, personal property, loss of use, and liability. Those are the three pieces of a renter's policy you got to get down. HO5 is a special form. So remember, HO2 is good, HO3 is better, but HO5 is the best. We do have reconstruction costs or replacement costs on your structures, actual cash value on your contents. But if you notice, now we have, not only do we have all risk coverage on the structures, we also have all risk coverage on the contents. That's why HO5 is better than HO3 because of the coverage on your personal property. Right? HO3 had broad form coverage on your contents. HO5, we give you all risk. Liability coverages are the same. Okay. So I do want to take some time to emphasize. You may get some questions, HO2 versus HO3 versus HO5. I always say HO2 is good, HO3 is better, HO5 is the best if you own a home. So HO2 is a broad form. You got broad form coverage on the structures, broad form coverage on your contents. HO3 is better because now you have all risk coverage on your structures, but you still got broad form coverage on your contents. And now HO5 is the best because now you have all risk coverage on the building and all risk coverage on your contents. All right. On the test, you may get some comparison questions. What's the difference between an HO3 and HO5? And HO5 gives you better coverage on your personal property, or they might say your coverage C perils. All right. So beware of those things. If you own a condo, HO6 would be the best homeowner's policy for your situation. And by the way, when you own a condo, it doesn't matter if it's downtown or, you own a condo in the middle of farmland community. One of the questions I've seen is, Jack owns a condo in the middle of farmland community. What type of coverage should he own? Is it a farm policy or is it a condo policy? Well, the question says he owns a condo. So your answer is HO6. Okay. flat out. It doesn't matter whether it's downtown or in a farmland area. The question does say he owns a condo. And so HO6 is the answer there. Right. Now, HO6 versus the HO4 renters. HO6, as you can see, there is some coverage for the structure, whereas in HO4 you don't. There is no other structures for condo, right? Because, I mean, you only own that unit that you're living in. But in some case, if you did have a storage facility or you are responsible for a separate garage, we can add it on. It is optional. You do need coverage for your personal belongings, okay? And if the condo burns down, you need money to stay at a hotel till they rebuild it. Oh, you guys noticing the liability is the same again? All right. There's no such thing as an HO7. So the next one's the HO8. It's that antique home. Again, actual cash value on everything. And since it's a modified HO1, it's all basic form perils on the, basic form coverage on the dwelling, on the structures, and your personal property. Right? So it is very limited recovery. Even theft losses on an HO8 are limited to $1,000 per occurrence. Okay. And then Section 2 liability, again, it's the same. And so on the test, you're going to get these, again, more comparison contrast questions. What two coverages are the different between an HO2 and an HO5? It's going to be structures coverage or personal property coverage, okay? I should say HO4 and HO5, okay? What's the difference between the two? They'll actually like for two things. And then what do these two policies have in common, or which are similar coverages on an HO4 and an HO5? And that would be liability medical. They're the same on all the homeowners policies. And so all the property coverages are slightly different, but the liability coverages are the same on all the homeowners policies. It's based on the limits you chose. All right. Some other items you want to know? If you own a mobile home, you can get the MH2 endorsement, MH200 endorsement, and you can add it to an HO2 or HO3. That means HO2 or HO3 may be used to cover a mobile home, not an HO5. So you cannot cover a mobile home with an HO5. Right? In order to be covered as a mobile home or manufactured home, depending on the year built, it must be at least 10 feet by 40 feet, single wide, and it's got to be worth at least $4,000 to be covered. If it's less than that or smaller than that, we won't cover it. Right? If you do own a condo, you can actually go to an HO4 or more commonly an HO6. Either one, I mean, you can use this HO4 or HO6 if you own a condo. HO6 is the better one. And this situation depends on your association, the condo association policy. So the condo association policy could have two parts. One, the association covers the common grounds, the exteriors, right, the stairways, right, the hallways where multiple people interact, and then the unit owner's coverage covers the interiors. And so if your association policy covers exteriors and interiors, all you would need is an HO4. But most association policies, they drop the interior unit owner's coverage to keep people's dues down. And so therefore you'd want to roll up to an HO6 because now you're responsible for the interior unit. Good. The reason I'm emphasizing this is, Jack owns a condo. What type of policy should Jack have? And you're looking for HO6, and you don't see HO6 by itself. You see it attached to HO4. HO4 or HO6 is the answer. You might get one that says, Jack owns a condo in farmland community. What type of policy should he have? And HO6 is the answer. So if you see, you won't see HO4 as a different answer. So if Jack owns a condo, what should he have? You'll see HO6 like HO2, HO3, HO6, or HO8. So HO6 is your answer. That's kind of how that question works. But you'll get another question if someone owns a condo, which policies are available to them for use? And then A will be HO2 or HO3, B will be HO4 or HO6. C will be HO2 or HO5. And then D will be like HO3 or HO8. Okay. And so in that case, HO4 or HO6, which is that one answer, that'd be the best one for that particular question. So your test kind of does things like that. Right? It won't just say one part, they'll add on something else to it. All right. Some other items to know: building ordinance coverage. Most of your policies exclude building ordinance or building code upgrades. So if your house was built in the 70s, it probably didn't have sprinklers in it. Because, times have changed, the building codes have changed, where if you had a fire, when they rebuild it, you'd have to put sprinklers in. Well, the insurance company typically won't cover that. You didn't have sprinklers before the fire. So to indemnify you, we're not going to put sprinklers in after the fire, because otherwise it's a gain, you see. So not only do you have to pay your deductible from that fire, you got to cover the increased cost of putting sprinklers in your house because the building codes have changed. Right? And so this is typically excluded, but you can actually purchase building ordinance coverage. All right. Now, the standard limit is 10% on your policies. The older the home, the more building ordinance coverage you should get. The older the home, the more the building codes have changed. Okay. So, yeah, so you want that increased coverage to help cover that. All right. Loss assessment. If there is a townhome association, condo association, or homeowners association, you live in an area where you pay dues to the association. And, everyone pays dues into their own account. And if a loss occurs, the board of directors of the association will have to determine, well, geez, how much is it going to cost to fix? And should we use the association policy, or should we just share the risk among the association members? But even if they file a claim with the association policy, that policy could have a high deductible. Well, what pays for that deductible is all those people that live in that area. And so they do what's called a loss assessment. Right? So let's say it costs, everyone has to pitch in $3,000 to cover the deductible, so we can use the association policy to re-roof our area because of the damage from a windstorm. All right? Well, your homeowner's policies only give you $1,000 for loss assessment. Your homeowners association is assessing you $3,000. So your policy pays $1,000, the other $2,000 you still got to pay out of your pocket. So you're not going to be very happy. And so you can get higher limits for that loss assessment. All right. Removal versus debris removal. Make sure you understand the difference. Debris removal is cleanup after a loss. A volcano erupts and dumps a bunch of ash on your house, and now you got to clean up that ash. That's debris removal, and that's covered. Some policies do have some limits. Removal is removing your property to protect it from any further loss. And where that comes in, usually at the time of a loss. All right, so your house is on fire. Number one, get everyone out. Call 911. And then you're probably going to run in your house and grab some of your belongings and move it to the front yard or the driveway to protect it from the fire, without endangering yourself, of course. That's what we call removal, removing your property from that imminent, or possible loss. And during this removal period, you have all risk coverage. So even though you may have an HO2 broad form, which doesn't cover a whole lot, it covers some items, during a period of removal where that HO2 property is on fire and you're taking stuff out of your house, and something else happens to it, during removal, it's covered. Okay? So keep that in mind. Workers' compensation. I'm in California, and workers' compensation is a mandatory endorsement. That means if you bought a homeowner's policy, I said you bought a homeowner's policy, which is a renter's policy. HO6 is a homeowner's policy. It includes workers' compensation. Now, it's typically for you have an in-home business, not an in-home business, back it up. You have a house and you hire some people to clean it, or they live there to upkeep the property, or maybe have the merry maids come in to clean up the property. If they don't have their own certificate of workers' compensation and they are injured cleaning your house, your policy does have workers' compensation in it. This can also be used if you do provide a service out of your house and if you have up to 2 employees. You still want to notify your insurance company, okay? But because it's a service out of your house and there's 2 people there, the risk has changed. But not retail sales. Retail sales isn't going to be covered under this workers' compensation piece. And nor is the increased risk associated with inventory at your house. There's retail sales out of your house. Like, number one, you have more inventory and you have more traffic coming to and from your house to pick up and drop off those items. Okay, so that's not what we're talking about. But yeah, workers' comp is built in. Okay. So keep in mind, homeowners is a self-contained package policy. In order to buy a homeowner's policy, the property must be owner occupied. You own it and you live in it. So if you own the house and you don't live there, you cannot buy a home policy. You're going to go to the dwelling coverage. Okay? Homeowners is 1 to 2 family living units. Again, a single family home or a duplex. Okay, that's how I want to know it. So yeah, that's that. Again, if you haven't registered, consider it. Just go to lgdstudy.com. I've got a lot of sample exam questions. I continuously add a couple here and there. The online Playbook is a great tool. I think it's a kind of a virtual flashcard set, giving you definitions and terminologies to help you out. The chart's kind of like that dwelling chart that we saw earlier in the presentation. So you understand the differences in the coverages, including homeowners and commercial versus personal coverages. There's some additional recorded webinars that you also have access to. And you also have access to me. I mean, you can email me with questions as you're studying through the material, and you need a little more clarification. Don't hesitate to reach out, okay? So with that, I'm going to open it up. Do you guys have any more questions? All right. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the thank you. And I did record this. I am going to post it. All right. No questions. Everyone's quiet tonight. Okay, Moses, so I'm going to post it on YouTube. It'll be public, but I'm also will put the link on my website. So if you're registered, you can just access it right then, right there. But I will be public on YouTube probably later tonight after it translates. Yeah, not a problem. It'll be up there for probably about 2 weeks, and then I'll take it down. So yeah, I want to put some other ones up. I just want to rotate them out. All right. No other questions? Well, thank you for taking time out of your evening to spend with me, learn some stuff to help you with your test. If you do have any additional questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Lauren at LGD Consulting, or just go to lgdconsulting.com and click to contact us and leave a message, pitch out some questions. Okay? All right. Can you give us some ideas on questions on ocean marine? Ocean marine, your 4 coverage parts are hull coverage, which covers the ship itself, the engine, the motor, including the gasoline or fuel, the test may say. Anything bolted, welded, nailed, attached to that ship, the engine, and the gasoline that's in the engine would be covered under hull coverage. All right. Instead of liability for ocean marine, we call it protection and indemnity. That's the ocean marine way of saying liability and medical payments. It can actually cover liability. It can be attached to the hull in case the ship hits something and damages it. Right? It can be attached to cargo, which is a third part of an ocean marine policy. Cargo covers the items that the ship is transporting, like the big cargo ships. Hull covers the ship. Cargo covers the crates that are on the ship that are being transported. Okay, so you can add P&I to the ship, the hull, or you can add it to the cargo, because the cargo could topple and do some damage. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Charles. Okay. Let's see. And also that protection and indemnity includes medical, like for the passengers. A lot of times it also includes workers' comp for the captain and crew of the ship. Okay. And then the fourth item would be freight coverage. Freight covers reimbursing the cost of what you paid to ship the cargo. So let's say you're paying someone to ship a crate, from one location to another. And not only did they lose the cargo, you lost the money you paid to have the cargo sent. So cargo coverage covers the crate that was damaged, destroyed, lost, and then freight coverage reimburses the shipping charges to have that crate shipped. It's kind of like reimbursing your stamp when you send a letter and the letter got lost. Those are the 4 ocean marine coverages that you want, and that's how you need to understand it. Okay? Hope that helps out. Cool. Yeah, and I do have Ocean Marine webinar. If you're logged into my site, I do have an Ocean Marine webinar that goes a little more detail and some more terminology and some of the perils that are covered or are not covered. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and call it a night.